Hello and welcome to Film Lovers. I'm Sonia Chung. I'll be talking to people who work in the film industry and who are also avid film lovers. Today I'm talking to filmmaker Richard Rowntree. Hello!
Hello, hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's been a bit hard trying to get hold of each other, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's never easy to organise these things, right? Everybody's got so much going on in their lives at the moment.
That's it. It's just and I think with everything, inflation and all that stuff, it's made it even harder. Everyone's just busy working all the time.
It's nuts. Well, I think as well for people who work in the film industry, it's kind of such a boom time at the moment.
Oh, really?
It's difficult trying to find any time to do anything. Yeah.
All right then. Well, we can talk about that in a bit. Let's start off by talking about you, really. So, I do this with everyone that I speak to for the first time. So it's basically an episode about you, really, just like where you started, how you started, your influence, etc., etc. And then naturally, we'll just see where the conversation goes. And then if it gets to a natural end, we just sort of say goodbye, finish it there. And you're more than welcome to come back anytime you want to do a special episode on anything you want. So why don't we start off? Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, Richard?
I'm a filmmaker, and I also have a full-time job that pays the bills, working in the film industry in the art department as well. Just coming to the end of post-production on our third feature film. They've all been horror movies. First one was a folk horror movie called Dogged. The second one was a home invasion kind of horror thriller called Nefarious. They're both available North America and UK and Ireland on sort of Amazon and iTunes and all the usual places. Just finishing up the third one, which is called Mask of the Devil, which is kind of a supernatural slasher movie set on the set of a low budget porn film.
Okay.
There's a lot of dark humor in it, and it's kind of a little bit different. We always try and do something a bit different every time we make movies. So I'm one quarter of a company called Ash Mountain Films, and we've done 10 shorts as well as the features. The features have all been crowdfunded on Kickstarter, which is kind of a really difficult way to make movies, but also a really satisfying one, because you kind of, you don't have investors that are breathing down your neck for a big return. So you got a bit more artistic freedom to just kind of go out and do what you want. Really nice. So we've been making movies for, I think, going on 10 years now or something. And I've worked in the industry in general full time for going on for 20 years now. And before that, kind of used to do a lot of volunteering on kind of, low budget and student productions. I'm quite lucky. I've always lived fairly close to Pinewood Studios. So there's kind of always a lot of filmmaking going on around here, even amateur stuff. So it was a good way to get involved in it. But I mean, I've kind of, going back further than that, I've always wanted to work in movies. I kind of decided when I was about 5 or 6 when I first saw The Shining.
You saw that at 5 or 6?
I know. It was funny. I was an only child, and my mum used to have to work a lot to kind of pay the bills and what have you, and so I had free reign at the local kind of video shop to just go in and get whatever I wanted, and they were very lax about the kind of the certification on the movies or whatever. Yeah, it was. I think by the age of 8 or 9, I'd pretty much seen all the kind of classic horror movies of the time, and it was kind of, I was starting to get into like the sort of action movies of the day, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and that kind of thing. Yeah, I just watched way too much stuff that was really inappropriate when I was way too young.
You never traumatized?
No, I wasn't actually. I don't remember ever having a nightmare about a movie. I do know that I saw Gremlins when I was quite young, and I think that probably freaked me out more than any of the kind
that scared me.
Out and out horror movies.
That scared me. My dad had to take me out the cinema. I was like, he was about the same, about 6 or 7, something like that, and he took me to see it, and it just scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good gateway horror movie, I think, for kids. That one. Yeah, there's some really horrific bits in it, but also, it kind of doesn't take itself too seriously, which is nice. So yeah, I've kind of all, renting movies was kind of a big babysitter. When I was young, and I would just, we used to be able to get 3 movies for the weekend or whatever, and just sit and watch them. Probably watched most of them twice over the course of a weekend, and just spent an awful lot of time watching movies, and kind of fell in love with them, and decided that was what I wanted to do as a career. And so kind of went to university and did film studies, and it was kind of more of a critiquing side of thing than a practical side of things. And I won't say it didn't help me at all, because obviously it did help with my filmic education, but it didn't teach me how to make movies. And back then, digital kind of filmmaking wasn't really a thing. The technology wasn't there and affordable. So I kind of went and got a job in the film business, and ended up, after about 10 years, realizing that I'd got into film because I wanted to make films, and all I was doing was kind of working on other people's movies. And so ended up just, taking a chance and making a short film with some friends, and it got really well received, which we were kind of a bit shocked by. And so things have kind of just progressed from there over the 10 years, and now kind of find myself where I am with, I don't know, like 5,000 people following me on Twitter or something. And it's kind of a really weird situation to be in. It's very, because I've got nothing to say other than what I put in my movies.
So after you left university, what was your very first job? Was it the runner or?
Yeah, well, no. So it was a bit odd. Like, at that time, the kind of film industry wasn't really, blossoming like it is now, and so it was quite a lot harder to find work. So I think I spent maybe 6 or 8 months just sending CVs into loads of places without really kind of having any direction of what it was I wanted to do, other than to work in film, because I hadn't been on sets of big movies, so I wasn't kind of specialized or focused on what I wanted to do. And like so many people, I ended up getting my first job through nepotism. It was kind of a family, like it was a family friend, but like kind of a distant one, and they had a job going at a post-production company, who were a post-production consultancy business in Soho, and I didn't really know what to expect, and I kind of went and worked there and ended up becoming a post-production coordinator. And I did that for sort of 2.5 years. And although I realized after a little while it wasn't, what I wanted to make a career out of, it was actually really helpful, because it gave me a really good grounding in the kind of back end of filmmaking, in terms of editing, scoring a movie, sound design, things like titles, title sequences, researching stock footage, and the deliverable materials that you have to send into a distributor and things like that, which I think a lot of filmmakers are kind of, don't really understand necessarily the processes of those things. So I was actually really lucky to go into it from that end, because I learned an awful lot that I wouldn't have done without doing it. And it's paid off later on, once I've started making my own movies, because I'm already familiar with the kind of processes and timescales and demands of distributors and things like that. So I did that for kind of 2.5 years, and it was mainly office based. And I got to go on, because it was kind of post production. I got to kind of go on some reshoots and things like that, as part of the post production team for movies, and kind of got a bit of a buzz out of being on set and being a part of the kind of production process. And so decided that was perhaps, what I wanted to do, but didn't really kind of know how to do it, or how to about getting a job, because everybody seemed so intrinsically linked within that kind of world that I wasn't sure how to break in or what avenue to go down. I kind of always knew that I wasn't really interested in the more technical side of things, so camera and lighting and that sort of thing. And then just by chance, a a kind of a traineeship came up,
Mm.
which was to go and work on a movie that was it was a European co-production, an EU co-production with Canada, and it was all being shot in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and it was about 2.5 months over the course of a summer, and so I kind of didn't really know what to expect, but kind of threw my hat into the ring. They were just advertising for trainees. There was no specific roles. And so I went for an interview and met one of the producers, and he said, well, look, he said, your skill set kind of sounds like, you might, work well in the AD department. And so, I was willing to give it a try. And so they took me on as a third AD. And I went over and spent 2.5 months kind of, learning that process on the job. Really enjoyed it. But kind of also, again, kind of realized that it wasn't necessarily the direction that I focus my career on.
Yeah.
And when we came back from that, again, I was kind of in a situation where I didn't really know what I was going to do next or how to go about it. And then through somebody that I'd met in my first job, I was offered the chance to become a kind of a really random job. They needed somebody at their production company who would be able to research festivals and submit their back catalogue of movies to festivals around the world to try and get a bit of distributor interest in them. And it was kind of something which I didn't really have any clue of what I was doing, but kind of, what, I'll come and do it. And this was in the days before tools like Film Freeway, where you can just log on and you can find out all the information about a particular festival, find out
submission. It basically sends all your submissions to every single film festival, doesn't it?
Exactly right. But back then it was kind of more of a case of you had to look up individual film festivals, websites, and kind of really trawl through them. And the application process or submission process was really quite protracted. There was a lot of paper forms, and again, it was kind of before digital screeners and things like Vimeo. So you had to send 6 reel kind of prints of film, to festivals, which was kind of nuts. But ended up doing that for about a year, and managed to get some of their movies into some decent festivals. And they were kind of impressed with my work ethic and my kind of general attitude to life, I think. And so the woman who, she was a writer, director, producer, basically offered me a job as her PA. And again, kind of, like all the way through my career, I didn't really know kind of what it was going to entail, but just kind of said, yeah, why not? And ended up doing that for 4 years, and worked with her on three pretty big feature films, kind of $10 to $20 million movies, with kind of, maybe not A-list, but, named cast, and got to travel, all around the world. I spent a lot of time living in Toronto and Los Angeles, and there was a kind of a 2.5 year period where I was commuting Monday to Friday down to near Nice in the south of France. It was nuts. So it was kind of a really weird time in my life, but a lot of traveling, a lot of fun, and kind of, because it was kind of a full production facility, I was going there, she was writing, and then we were producing and then going through all the post-production. So I kind of had the last bit of educational information that I needed in terms of the pre-production process. So by the time I'd done with that job, I'd been through kind of, the pre-production, production, and post-production stages of kind of filmmaking at different, I felt like I kind of then had all of the tools that I needed to be able to, or all of the education I needed to kind of try and go out and make something of our own films, because, I had a bit of impetus. I'd seen how it had been done, and I'd kind of learned as much what not to do as what I should be doing. And so that was kind of the stage we were at, and so that's when we decided to kind of start making some movies, and kicked it off from there. And at the same time, I just got married, and we were expecting our first child, and kind of needed a full job to pay the bills at the same time. And I'd always got on really well with people in the art department, and really enjoyed, kind of chipping in a little bit with the different bits of, because that's the fun part,
Good
right?
fun. Yeah, I did it once. It was really good fun. I
Yeah,
did it on a horror film. I was going to talk to you about that, but carry on, and then we'll go back to it.
the fun part. And anyway, so there was a job at a company, not based fairly close to me, where they were taking on a trainee greensman. So a lot of people don't know what a greensman is. So I just do a little segue and explain that. So basically, kind of designing and installing anything that's natural scenery, so forests or jungles or deserts, anything like that. And so they kind of took me on it, pretty much as a trainee, and I kind of fell into it and seemed to be I seem to be appreciated for doing it, and I've ended up doing 120 odd TV shows and movies since I've been there. And so I kind of do that as a day job to pay the bills, but it's still a fun job to do. It keeps me in the film industry, keeps the credits ticking over. In the meantime, spending weekends and evenings trying to make our own movies and promote those, and kind of trying to get to where we all want to be, at some point where we can just have blank checks written for us and make whatever movie.
It must be very time consuming though, because obviously you're doing that full time, and at the same time, in your own time, you're trying, you've got a family, you've got your wife, and then you're also trying to get these other projects, that you want to get done.
This is
They
a lot
suck.
of
It's quite a lot to take on, isn't it?
it is a lot of graft for sure. But if you're really passionate about it,
Yeah.
and I don't consider either of the jobs that I do really to be, like an arduous job. I'm enjoying what I'm doing most of the time, certainly with making my own movies. And so it really helps, obviously, with any job, right? If you're enjoying yourself, then actually, really feel like going to work. So
It doesn't feel like a job, does it? Because it's something you're passionate about. So it's something you genuinely like doing.
Yeah, and working with some great people, across the board, and particularly with the movies we make, we've got a really tight knit kind of team of very regular collaborators, and we all get on really well, and we've all kind of got the same end goal. So everybody gives their all, and I think that the movies that we make, kind of, people don't really believe us, I don't think, when we tell them what the budgets were.
Yeah.
So that I think that's about the biggest compliment that you can get working at the level that we are. So it's as long as it remains fun, and you're putting something out that people are impressed by, then all power to your elbow. It doesn't matter if you never make it, as it were.
You're trying.
As long as you're doing it, it's a creative process, it's an artistic process. I think a lot of people kind of forget that along the way. It becomes very commercial in a lot of senses, and that's not what filmmaking's about for me.
Are you quite lucky in the fact that you can make your own? I mean, not make your own, but you can decide what kind of genres you want to do, or is it kind of like maybe the distributors will come to you and say, "Well, actually, there's more of a demand for this," because my friend Jason and his girlfriend, he was saying at the time that actually there was more of a demand for when he made his documentary for documentaries rather than mainstream films. So he's a bit like you; he does a lot more horror. But I think he was trying to sort of broaden his spectrum. So I can kind of see that if on the financial side, if you know that that's going to be sold more out there, then you can kind of see why they might go up to people, filmmakers like you, and say, can you maybe do something like this instead, and then we can market it easier, or would that happen?
Yeah, I think that the key thing with horror particularly is that distributors know there's a built-in market for it. There's this kind of traditional demographic that they have of white middle-income boys aged 14 to 25, will consume anything horror. If it's there, they'll watch it. They don't really care about production values or storylines. If it's got a catchy title and there's a pair of boobs in it and lots of blood, then they're going to watch it, right? So there's the kind of easy sell aspect of it, and
I see, yeah.
Certainly, I think in terms of the publicity and advertising that you can do yourselves as well, it's easier to kind of capture the imagination of fans who are really into that genre, because it's not really any genres like nobody's like a die-hard rom-com fan.
No, yeah.
Not like they'll seek out any rom-com that's going, sort of thing, or whereas with horror fans, they totally will do that. And they're kind of the last niche of people as well who are really into physical media, so they love buying DVDs, they love buying merchandise. Again, largely because of that demographic and the fact that they probably have more disposable income than other target audiences, as it were. But I mean, I think that the kind of reason that we make horror movies is because the people that the team that I'm working with, we all love horror, and so what we want to do all the time is make a movie that we would want to watch ourselves. And sometimes, that kind of falls outside of that key demographic bracket that the distributors are looking for. And so it's not necessarily, what we found, with our first two movies is they've done the festival circuit. They've done really, really well at festivals kind of all over the world, won awards, got loads of positive reviews, and they get sent out to the kind of horror press, and they get, largely positive reviews there as well. And then the movies go on general release, and that key demographic of boys aged 14 to 25, they start watching it, and there's no blood, or there's very little blood, and there's no boobs, and so suddenly they're really disappointed, and they go on IMDb and leave you a 1 out of 10 score, and start bad mouthing you on the internet and whatever. And you kind of have to take a step back and go, look, you're not the intended audience here, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, I'm not really taking your comments or your criticism to heart.
Just wondering, because when I spoke to Jason, because I said, like I said, he also does a lot of horror films, and then we did an episode about the porn industry. He said a lot of the times it crosses over. So, for instance, have you had any maybe adult performers in your films, or have you crossed over somehow? Quite similar.
Yeah, so I can see. I mean, there's kind of psychological studies about the links between porn and horror and why the kind of that is there. And obviously, there's a lot of tropes in kind of particularly 70s and 80s movies where it's like, if you have sex, you're going to die in this movie or whatever. So, and I think again that's kind of partially because of the target audience, right? So it's they're trying to impose some sort of moral stance on those people that are watching it in that kind of bracket. But I mean, we haven't had any. I mean, I've always said, because we've toyed around with the idea when we're writing these movies, like, do we need to have a topless woman in this to kind of make it attractive? But for me, it's like anything else, right? I don't want to put something in a script or in a movie unless it's actually there for a reason and driving the plot forward. I don't want to put, so and so suddenly in this scene is taking their top off just for the sake of gratifying 14-year-old boys that might be watching. I'm just not into it. It's like, if it genuinely was needed to drive the plot, then I would absolutely consider it. But no, I mean, we've never had anybody from that industry work on one of our movies. Okay. I know a lot of people do, but for me, it's the same kind of thing as a lot of low budget movies, particularly in the UK. They'll find what they consider to be a horror icon in terms of an actor, somebody who's been in something, way back when, and they'll put them in it so that they can plaster them all over the advertising and the cover of the DVD, just to get people in. But again, we've had the opportunity to do that, but it's just not. I would much rather find someone who's right for the role, who I know that I'm going to work with well on set, rather than just getting somebody in for the sake of being a name. I mean, I'll never rule it out, of course, right? But it's, you know, it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick more than it is, you know, a proper artistic choice for me. So,
Yeah. Cool. So, who were your film influences growing up then, Richard?
I think obviously I really, like a lot of people my age, like I was really into Steven Spielberg's movies growing up. You know, there's just so many kind of great magical adventures, you know, throughout, and you know, all of those kind of movies. I would say that I wasn't, you know, until I was maybe, I don't know, 13, 14, I wasn't kind of really aware of directors or filmmakers as such. You know, I'd kind of recognized there were different styles to the storytelling, but wasn't necessarily kind of au fait with who they are. Obviously, everybody knew Steven Spielberg's name just because it was, you know, he just had hit after hit after hit in the kind of, you know, late 70s and 80s. But then, yeah, I think the first time I kind of really recognized a very distinctive style that made me find out who had made it and what it was when I saw Seven, David Fincher, and it was kind of so dark and so different from anything I'd really seen at the time, that I was really intrigued by that. And I actually, you know, the vast majority of his movies I'm a big fan of still. I think, you know, movies like Zodiac, are, you know, they've just got such a unique style to them, that, you know, yeah, I'll watch kind of, you know, anything that he makes. And I think as I've kind of got a bit older and kind of perhaps more mature, I don't know, or maybe more interested in art, I don't know, I've kind of, you know, I've been really drawn to kind of David Lynch's movies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm kind of really into. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, The Elephant Man was another one that I'd seen, you know, kind of when I was, you know, maybe in my mid-teens, and you know, it kind of goes over your head a little bit at that age. But you know, again, there's kind of a very unique style to it. And I was aware of Twin Peaks being on the TV, you know, when I was kind of, I don't know, maybe 10 or something, and kind of didn't really get it. I maybe watched a few episodes, but wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't really into it. But then, you know, I sat down with my wife and we watched it maybe 5 years ago, and kind of watched it all through, and then watched the you know, the Twin Peaks: The Return, that he did, and was kind of mesmerized by it, and then kind of started exploring his movies again. Got a box set and sat down and watched them all again, and got really into those. Yeah, I you know, I think anybody who's a good storyteller, you know, and you know, there's very few people who kind of have a run of, you know, making movies where there's no duds. They're few and far between, but you know, some of those people do exist, and you know, I really like Hitchcock movies on the whole, but some of them I really find kind of almost not unwatchable, but just not really my kind of bag. And he's a great storyteller, but doesn't necessarily have his own visual style to the storytelling. He's kind of all about servicing the script all the time. So I think anything with a bit of flair, it kind of intrigues me. And unfortunately, you know, more and more, certainly the last 5 years or something, since kind of Marvel and Star Wars and everything's taken over in the cinemas, you know, as much as I enjoy those movies, I don't feel like anybody or very many people get the chance to, with the exception of maybe people like Christopher Nolan, really kind of stamp a visual style on their movies and still get a theatrical release. So I think, yeah, it's kind of dwindling away, and particularly with the advent of Netflix and Apple TV and Amazon and things like that, everything kind of really feels very kind of TV, and everything's very formatted, and it's difficult, apart from at film festivals where you're kind of seeing independent people who don't have those restrictions, to kind of find stuff that really intrigues me anymore. So yeah, I think film festivals are great. I love going to them, and I love seeing what different kind of people are approaching filmmaking as an artistic style, and because that's what I want to do. I try and have my own kind of visual style as well as servicing the script. And so yeah, I think anybody who can still get away with it is doing well. And yeah, I'll always follow them.
I kind of get the sense that you're the kind of film watcher, maybe a bit like me, that likes to be challenged by a film.
Yeah,
And that's, do you know what I mean? It makes you feels feel a certain way, and like you said, that unfortunately the mainstream now cinema. I mean, I've spoken about this many times. Is that they keep making these films because people keep watching them. So kind of you're just kind of encouraging, really, and then it's kind of sort of like, all these really good films that they are out there, but you have to really look hard for them. So yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that now, I mean, it would probably be Christopher Nolan, who's like the big one out there, who does more of those intelligent type films. Um,
yeah. I think I was really lucky actually. I got to work on Dune with Denis Villeneuve, and he's another one who I think he's got a very unique style and um, kind of approaches even the blockbuster movies. When he did the Blade Runner sequel and things like that, and Dune, there's a dreamlike quality to them,
mm,
and like you say, they are challenging. I think you know there's kind of two sins in filmmaking for me. One is kind of like making something that anybody would ever feel bored at any point while they're watching it, but also and I critique a lot of stuff that I watch in this way, is that afterwards, does it leave me with questions, or am I just like, oh, okay, everything's sewn up and I'm quite happy to just leave it like that? I would much rather watch something like you say, where I'm
Lisa.
questioning things and questioning people's motives and what happens to the characters after this story finishes. you know so I think all of those aspects are really important actually for me as a filmmaker, with my own work, but also with the stuff I'm watching, um, to kind of keep me on side.
Yeah. So you're it's fair to say that you're kind of attracted to the weird and wonderful as well, a bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
It's funny because you spoke about Seven earlier and David Fincher. Um, he's really good at doing that kind of genre, isn't he? The kind of dark stuff. Like, well, I mean, he's worked with Brad Pitt a few times, so they are now obviously really good friends. So they've worked together a lot. Um, but I think he did really his best work in Seven and Fight Club. And then he did, which I really didn't like. I mean, I found it a bit strange, and then I watched it several years later, and I found it really disturbing. The one with Benjamin Button.
Benjamin Button. Yeah, it's actually there's kind of quite a lot of dark elements to that, right? It's this
But I found
really
it
kind of
disturbing the second time I saw that.
yeah, it's a really tragic story, right? About how and in the same way, in a weird way, as something like La La Land, where it sets you up for this premise where you're like, you know, you're used to seeing this story. Oh, eventually you'll find the right person and fall in love, right?
Mm.
That's the kind of myth that Hollywood sells. But both of those movies actually are going, you might find that person, but the chances are it's not going to happen with them at the time when you meet them. And so, at the end of the day, we're all going to die lonely. And and I think that's actually a really interesting way to approach it. And that was my reading of La La Land. I know a lot of people kind of, don't necessarily get that from it, but for me, that was the kind of vibe that it gave off, and so I think, I don't generally enjoy musicals, and I still maintain that I feel like La La Land would be a better movie if it wasn't a musical and was just this tragic kind of love story.
Yeah.
But so I think, yeah, Benjamin Button is definitely, it's got those kind of dark elements to it. But I don't know, it's much maligned, but Alien 3, and I know he didn't have final cut on it, for me actually is a brilliant sequel to two movies that are both brilliant as well, but so different from each other. And
Mm.
having that as a third one, which is so detached again in terms of the style of the movie and the kind of genre almost, actually works really well. And I would love to be able to see a full kind of director's cut where he'd been able to do whatever he wanted with that
Yeah.
movie, because I
Well, I
think,
guess they
again,
had to make it their own. I mean, there was the infamous second one, wasn't there, with James Cameron, who apparently is very difficult to work with, and whenever they said Aliens 2, it's like no, I can't.
yeah,
I can't remember. It was like it's not Aliens. No, it's not Alien 2. Sorry, because the first one's Alien, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
And the second one's Aliens. And
yeah.
and I was like, oh, Aliens 2, and it's like, no, no. It's
I think there's a really
Alien,
interesting
my film.
there's a really interesting documentary series on Netflix called "The Movies That Made Us."
Yeah, I saw that, and then
Yeah, the one about aliens is it's kind of almost comical how he kind of James Cameron kind of tried to impose himself on everything.
But actually, that's an interesting point to bring up with you because you've spoken about how you travel a lot. Because there was a really fun, that show. I like that series. It's really clever. I like the way I like those kind of, how things get made, and all the kerfuffle that goes around. You don't realize there's so much hard work that goes behind it.
This is it, particularly with movies that you've watched when you're younger, right? Because you're totally oblivious to the filmmaking process at that stage. So yeah.
Because that film, they talk about in the that show, the movies that made us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they talk about how because most of the crew were English, weren't they?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
American Canadian ones. He's Canadian. His wife at the time, I think it was his wife or the producer was. I think
Gail,
was Canadian. She was very hot. And I think maybe there was one more American. They were the majority of them are English. And the American Canadians hate the fact that the English crew had so many tea breaks.
Yeah.
When they don't have them in America, and it's like, come on, we're here to do work. And every time they get close to doing something, it's like, oh, the tea lady comes in with her tea trolley.
Well, I think with him as well, like, and he, he'd come from that kind of ultra low budget horror filmmaking background, working for Roger Corman. And I think, the turnaround on those movies was so quick and so cheap, but so effective as well. That, coming here where it was kind of effectively almost a unionized kind of, crew system. And certainly at that time, a lot of the people who were working as heads of department in the industry were kind of upper class. And so, had this real thing about kind of Americans or Canadians coming in and, we know how to do it properly sort of thing. And, we're not going to rush it and do it kind of cheap and quick and easy. So, I think that, there was an interesting clash of personalities on that set from watching that show.
Maybe a culture clash as well, but
yeah.
Because the woman who played Newt, she's on that. She's on it as well, and obviously she's
right
now, but she was a little girl at the time, and she said she loved tea time.
Yeah,
I thought she loved tea time because she's American, but she moved to England, didn't she? Because she grew up in England with her family. Her father.
Yeah, she was from Army base. Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, that's an interesting question to bring up to you. Because we're talking about culture clashes, etc. And is there have you noticed any differences between one film industry and another? So, for instance, the difference between American film industry and English, just a generalization, is there any things you picked up on the work ethic? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, kind of in the States, there's a few non-union states where you can shoot movies, but largely they're kind of very unionized over there. And we shot a movie in New Mexico, and the kind of the props department won't get involved in something that the graphics department is supposed to be doing for fear of losing their jobs. And you can't just say to a runner, oh, can you go and drive this actor down to the drugstore because they need some headache tablets or something, because then there's a drivers union called the Teamsters, and they're like, well, no, if you're doing that, then you're treading on our toes. And so there's kind of a bit of that. Whereas here, even on big budget stuff in the UK, it tends to be a bit more kind of all hands to the pump and everybody mucking in. And, if somebody's passing by and you need a hand, lifting something up, you just call them over and kind of everybody gets involved a little bit more, I think, in that sense. But I mean, everybody's, they're very hard and fast about, look, if it's 5:30 and I'm contracted till 5:30, it gets to 5:31 and then you're going to pay me overtime, which again, it's kind of a bit alien to me in terms of approaching filmmaking from an artistic point of view. Because it's if you've got to work another 5 minutes at the end of the day to make something perfect, then I would happily do it myself in both my day job and on my own movie. So yeah, that concept's kind of a bit weird to me, and I think that probably both sides of the Atlantic, people maybe get into the film industry, or some people maybe get into the film industry for the wrong reasons. They get into it for the kind of glamour and fame and the money. Whereas, I'm kind of a bit of an idealist and think that everybody in every department should be, an artist who's there to make art, which is, it's a totally unrealistic expectation. But nonetheless, that's kind of where my head's at, unfortunately. So not always conducive to to getting things done.
Then like you said, they're all chipping in to make this final piece of art. So everyone's, like I said, everyone's jobs. I said this to somebody else. Literally, everyone involved has an important thing to give to it, because otherwise, without them, it's so you can't afford to have diva strops or whatever, and you do, and then you realize actually, I mean, it goes on now, don't you? You hear about these A-listers where they've gone to Russell Crowe, Sharon Stone, these very difficult ones that after a long period of time they've built up a reputation where actually they've kind of been a bit alienated from the film industry. So that goes around, and it's probably a bit like the theatre industry, I'd imagine. It's a very small community, so you don't want to go around pissing people off, because
exactly, yeah.
So I can, I mean, like, this brings us back to that episode of Alien in the Netflix series.
Yeah.
That's basically what happened, wasn't it? He kind of alienated himself from the rest of the crew. They just basically at one point were going to say, "No, we're not dealing with this anymore. We're not dealing with your diva drops, and you're like, nope, we're going to do this again because something really stupid, like, oh, it wouldn't move that way, and it's just like, it's ridiculous. It's going over time, and you're not getting paid." So you can see, like, you wouldn't want to piss off, the majority of the English crew, because without them, you're screwed. So
yeah,
it really was, wasn't it?
I think the old adage kind of applies, to the film industry perhaps more than anywhere else. It's kind of, be nice to people on the way up, because you never know when they're going to overtake you.
And we were staying in the theatre industry as well. And I remember hearing that when I worked as front of houses as a 19-year-old. I remember even at the time, people on the show or front of house, because a lot of the time front of house, which is what I did a lot in my 20s on and off between traveling and stuff, a lot of them are in between jobs. So it's probably a bit like, like you have a day job to support yourself, and then on the side you're going up for auditions and you're doing all the stuff that you want to do. So you don't want to go around upsetting people, because that's going to come back to you in the end.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you brought up David Lynch earlier, and I was going to ask you, did you ever see the film Eraserhead? Because I remember seeing that in college. We did a term on, I think it was in the second year, because I did a BTEC media studies. The second year, for one of the modules, I think it was film theory. We did a term on avant-garde films, and then we had quite a big paper at the end of it. So our lecturer was showing us, extracts of avant-garde films and breaking it down, going into all this film theory nerdy stuff. We watched that film, and I mean, not the film, but the disturbing scene at the dinner table. At the dinner table, and I was probably 17, and I remember seeing this clip, because he only showed clips, to give us a bit of
sure,
a theory or whatever, break it down, and we were all kind of like silent after we switched it off, because it's just really random. It's like, you explain the setup.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a really challenging watch, but I think that it got him noticed to the point whereby he was able to kind of then start making the movies that he wanted to make. It's kind of almost a studenty type film, and I
Mm.
know what you mean about these kind of avant-garde movies. I had to do a whole semester on kind of Nicholas Roeg movies, kind of Performance and Don't Look Now and things like that. And they're kind of really challenging, to watch. So I think those movies are important in terms of having a film education, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to anybody who, uh, if my best mate phoned me up and said, "Oh, what shall I watch tonight?" I would never recommend it. It's
Yeah.
not that sort of movie, right? And there's movies, lots of movies like that. But again, those you get to see some gems here and there at film festivals, but a lot of the kind of stuff that you see there, is very experimental, and that's kind of one of the reasons I enjoy doing it. But yeah, it's not for kind of a mainstream audience as such, right? It's yeah,
Would you ever?
specialized.
I like that. I like that because I like the fact that they're being bold and not following anyone's rules. And you know, obviously mainstream films they have to follow a certain like mise en scène. So I like the fact that they're going against the rules and breaking them, for
Yeah,
making this art. Um, and it's just a kind of a shame that you don't see it now. But I can understand why it's a very, very limited audience that sees it,
yeah.
because it wouldn't be in a cinema really, would it?
No, for sure. And I mean, yeah, it's not the sort of thing that Netflix or people like that would pick up ever. And you used to get, there was the odd experimental thing on, like, channels like BBC Three, things like that. Maybe on Channel 4, they sometimes show bits and pieces like that. But because they're not kind of mainstream viewing, it's very difficult to get any sort of traction behind a kind of a public performance of them in any way. And so that, they're a really good breeding ground for young artists to experiment in different styles and techniques and storytelling, kind of vehicles, as it were. But I think that's kind of, in this day and age, that's kind of the limit of them. I don't think, there's very little audience hunger for anything that really challenges you, like you say, which is why, we've got our local cinema, they got 10 screens. At the moment, there's 9 screens showing Doctor Strange and maybe 1 screen showing a kids movie.
Yeah,
So rather than kind of spreading that around, and I get it, right? Like, the cinema chains need to make money, of course they do, particularly after the last couple of years. But
yeah,
it's it doesn't really, I mean, doesn't really leave audiences open to exploring and discovering new movies anymore, unless it's kind of rammed down their throat, which is a
yeah.
shame.
Um, do you remember back in the 90s, there was a time when there were a lot, and I think they're maybe still around, but very few now, where they had more the sort of um independent cinemas, the very small cinemas that show these weird and wonderful
Yeah,
things. And I remember there's one in, because I used to live in Fulham at one point, and I went to school in near Sloane Square. Well, it was in Sloane Square, and so I had to get the bus down King's Road. That very famous,
yeah,
very famous fashionable road. So there was the big cinema, the one that showed all the films that were coming out for everyone to see. And then sort of along the way, much, much further down, there was a very small little cinema that showed 1 or 2 sort of odd films. Um,
yeah.
there doesn't seem to be that many now, are there? Or do you have to really look
It,
for them?
I don't think there are many around. I think places like the Electric Cinema, and the Rex Cinema, and the very few kind of independent ones that survive, are able to take those risks. And even to some extent, the kind of Prince Charles Cinema in Leicester Square as well, they get to show certainly, old rep movies and things like that. But I think, with Cineworld and Odeon and kind of Empire, they kind of cornered the market, in terms of big kind of shopping centre or high street based cinemas. And so, they've got such high bills to pay that, also, the other thing is the cost of going to the cinema in this country is insane. For, if I want to take a family of 4 people, by the time we've kind of done parking and, popcorn and everything. It's
Yeah,
£100.
it's a shame.
£100 to go to the cinema for an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's kind of nuts. If it was £30 or something, you'd go more than 3 times as often because the kids love doing it. I love going to the cinema. Oh, sorry, all my lights have just gone off.
That's right.
Um,
Carry on. Come back.
um,
Putting this down. Okay.
so yeah, I think affordability is a big problem with cinema, and that's is part of the kind of bigger issues that we have in the British film industry with kind of exhibition across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's although having said that, there was one point where I worked at the Odeon in 2010, and I was only there for about 6 months. It didn't last long. And but it was only late at night, and I remember them showing in one screen only, and it was about 12 screens. I mean, it's a massive one in Kingston. I don't know if you've been to the one in Kingston.
I haven't, but yeah,
It's 12 screens, but then literally, like you said, I mean, at the time, I remember what was the Christopher Nolan film? The one that was really confusing. Inception was on
Inception, yeah.
at least 6 screens, and then there was something else on 2 screens. But the big one was always out on the most screens. And I remember once, probably quite late at night, they showed Dogtooth, and I went in and I saw that bit. Well, I just saw a little bit, and I just remembered thinking, I don't know what this is about. But actually, that's a clever one to bring up because the filmmaker, he's Greek, isn't he? Yogros something.
Yeah,
Very well.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
American mainstream, and he's done really well actually because now all these Hollywood A-listers are signing up to work with him, which kind of is on the opposite spectrum of it because actually he is making more of these arty, sort of strange experimental films. He did The Lobster.
Yeah, I think the problem is with a lot of directors is that they might start out kind of artistic and making these kind of movies, but the problem for a lot of them is as soon as they get offered the chance to go and do a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie, they jump at the chance because they think it's going to progress their career, and then they get to the set almost, and everything is so corporate, and they have to deliver exactly what is on the page.
Mm.
Suddenly there's no scope for them to stamp their own style on these things, and so they've spent all these years working to get to a point where they can direct a movie like that, and suddenly actually all they are is part of a big conveyor belt of Marvel movies or whatever it is. So it's a really interesting challenge, I think, if you can get to that stage. Can you hold out, and have you got the nerve to kind of say, I'm not going to take that movie because I want to keep making, The Lobster or whatever it is, and yeah, that's a really difficult challenge because obviously, like everybody's got bills to pay. You can understand it. Presumably,
you're going to go where the money is, aren't you?
yeah, well, presumably, exactly. If you go and do a Marvel movie, you've got to think that maybe if that happens, then you're set up for life, right? But not just off the paycheck from that, but because then studios know you're a safe pair of hands, so you get to come in and do the Batman movie, or you get to come in and do, whatever it is, the next part of a franchise here and there. So I think it's about holding your nerve as much as you can in that situation if you've got into it for the right reasons. But again, if you've got into the film industry because you want money and you want fame and you want to work with Ryan Reynolds or whatever it is, then sure, you're going to do that and you're going to take that option. But yeah, I think it's a really tricky one. I can't say how I would answer if I was in that position. I like to think that I would be able to hold off and say no, but you never know. I'm not telling Marvel not to call me, by the way, but
it's kind of like a catch-22, and you hear about well, it's the same for actors, isn't it? They often say they prefer working in a theatre, but at the same time, working in a theatre pays them less, so they have to do every now and then a big budget
exactly,
they
yeah,
don't want to do, to bring the money in. So you kind of need to go, you need to kind of weigh it up. But there have been circumstances. I remember talking to someone about The Usual Suspects, and there was a point where Peter Gabriel, what was his name? Not Peter Gabriel. Gabriel Byrne was doing a lot of work in the States. And he found it very hard after The Usual Suspects, I think, making it, because he began to realize actually there was too much control from the Hollywood studios. And I can kind of imagine actually that wouldn't be very, especially when you're an actor or like you, when you're a very creative person, you know, you want this freedom to do, you don't have to be told, I've got to do this, you need to do this, you need to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of takes the fun away, and it's just like you said, it's a money making corporate machine. It's just like, I'm just here to make, you know what I mean? It doesn't.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I mean, I think you can't be naive like I was kind of at the start of my career, thinking that it's all about the art. Obviously, you know, investors have got to make their money back and make a profit as well. But I don't kind of ascribe to the view that I think a lot of the big studios have, where if we're going to spend, for example, 100 million on a movie, then opening weekend it has to make 300 million, or we won't even consider a sequel. To me, that's nonsense. If the movie costs 100 million, and you know, over the 3 months or whatever that it gets a theatrical release, as long as you're going to make 150 million, for example, then that warrants a sequel, or that warrants, you know, financing that filmmaker again. It shouldn't be about, you know, you've got to hit these targets, because then, exactly like you say, it just becomes this big kind of corporate machine, which isn't actually good for anybody. I mean, it's so many people's minds have been numbed, I think, by just watching, you know, over and over again these kind of Hollywood blockbusters, you know, Michael Bay movies and whatever. And don't get me wrong, they've got their place. You know, they're kind of largely kind of entertaining fun that doesn't challenge you, and there is a place for those movies, but they're not the things that will stand the test of time. You know, in 50 years or whatever. You know, I think, you know, we're 50 odd years nearly since Jaws, right? And you go, well, okay, Jaws still stands out as this amazing movie.
Yeah.
You know, or Star Wars, the original Star Wars, things like that. But so many of the kind of big budget, as it were, movies from you know, the late 70s and 80s and 90s that might have made a lot of money at the time, actually, if you revisit them now, they're not very good movies, a lot of them, and they're kind of, you know, oh well, so you know, there's exceptions to that. Obviously, you know, there's Back to the Futures and things like that, which really stand up still today. But on the whole, I think, you know, unless you're actually, you know, like we said earlier, right, unless you're actually trying to tell a story and you know, there's a point behind your movie, there's no point throwing big money at it and putting big stars in it just for the sake of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's just safe money, isn't it? It's just like, you know, we need this money, we get it now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I said in a short amount of time, it'll be forgotten about, and something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So
this is my gripe as well, slightly, about kind of you know, how many movies that won the Best Picture award at the Oscars can you remember going back over a period of time? And it's quite an interesting one, because, you know, in the relatively recent past, you know, if you look at the list of those movies, you go, oh my God, like I'd completely forgotten about that movie from only 10 years ago or something. And a lot of it is this kind of, yeah, I don't know, shoehorning and butt kissing that goes on in Hollywood, I think, to kind of appease people. There's exceptions to the rule. You know, movies like Moonlight or whatever, which, again, I don't think it even got a theatrical release outside London.
I love Moonlight.
You know, and it's just such an incredible movie, and just got totally eclipsed by La La Land in the same year, right?
Yeah. No, I love Moonlight, the one of Nicolas Cage and Cher.
No, that's Moonstruck.
Sorry,
so Moonlight was. It was
the same. La La La. Yeah. Oh, the whole big debacle with the Oscars.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's an amazing movie.
No, it's been a mistake.
It was kind of part financed by Brad Pitt, so, you know, people like that have still got a real interest in making those really interesting movies, but they can't necessarily, you know, be in them themselves because they've got other commitments here and there to, you know, Troy or you know, whatever it is that they're doing at the time. So I think like you say, you know, actors as well as kind of directors kind of do need to kind of hold their nerve and carry on with the kind of creative process as well as just kind of the commercial side of things.
Yeah, sure. All right then, Richard. I think that's probably a good way to the best way to sort of end things because I'm also running out of time. So what we'll do next time is I'll have to do it in bits. So we'll do it that way instead on Anchor podcast.
Sounds good.
Because the Zoom things annoy me now. It's like oh, time's running up. It's like, it's too stressful. I used to do that before. I could just go on for ages, and I don't know what's going on.
Well, you need a ticking clock. You always need a ticking clock in a good script, right? So
I don't like that. It stresses me out. It's like normal day-to-day stuff when I'm always having to rush around, go from work to here, and I don't like it. I don't like having to be set a time or
too much pressure. Yeah,
there and everywhere. I'll do that next time, and then we don't have to stress out so much.
Sounds good.
Every 29 minutes, I'll have to go to the team, pause, and then I'll get on, do it again, and start again. We carry on. But it's been lovely talking to you, and
you too.
Anytime. Have a think about if you want to do anything as a special episode, or if you want to talk about anything. It can be about a project you're doing, or if you want to do like a genre or a favorite director films. It can be absolutely anything as long as it's film related. Or we could
cool.
Chat about something like I did with Jason and his partner Rachel, just about the porn subculture, and because that's quite interesting. So things like that, whatever sparks your interest, if you have a think and see if anything comes to your mind. So that'd be good. Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Richard.
No problem at all. It was nice speaking to you.
You too, and come back anytime.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.